There's something that I've been hearing from teachers over and over again lately, and it comes up in conversations and in emails, and in those quiet moments after professional development sessions where they feel comfortable to kind of share with me how they're feeling. And when they do so, they're using different words, kind of like overwhelmed, exhausted, behind, or even challenging. And I know firsthand how it feels to walk away from an absolutely exhausting day. I think we can all agree that there are not enough hours in the day. Hi, I'm Cindy, and this is the Community Effect Podcast. On this show, we talk about all things teaching and learning, from building authentic relationships to creating a classroom culture where students thrive. We dig into mindset, motivation, engagement, and behavior because real classroom success isn't just about lesson plans, it's about the community you build. These are conversations for teachers who want more than to just survive. And these are strategies for educators who are ready to take their community to the next level. This is the Community Effect Podcast. Early in my career, my exhaustion showed up in small ways. A little planning at night or on weekends, maybe a little less breathing room in the morning, a few more expectations I had to juggle through the day, just little things. But I also know when that feeling shifted for me, like from exhausting to, oh my goodness, how did I get here? How did this get so hard? And to be honest, this feeling, it hit me the hardest in 2022 when I had actually retired from teaching and then came back because I missed it. But I had gone back during the pandemic actually and done an online second grade class. And then the next year I came in and did a 3-4 combo. And I can tell you that that year, there were multiple times when I got into my car and I just thought to myself, oh my goodness, how is it that after 26 years in education, how did this get so challenging? Why am I so stinking overwhelmed? And why do I feel so defeated? And here's the thing, teachers have always worked hard. That's not new. It's always required patience, creativity, and resilience. And that part of the job has not really changed over time. But what I'm hearing from people lately feels different than ordinary exhaustion. And I actually experienced that. It's the kind of heavy where you walk into your classroom in the morning already feeling behind, even though your day hasn't even started yet. You know, that kind of heavy where you sit down at the end of a day and you realize that you have been moving nonstop, 100 miles an hour, but you're not even sure where all of that energy went. And here's the interesting part, many teachers assume something must be wrong with them for feeling that way. They start wondering whether or not they're not managing their time well enough, or maybe they're not organized enough. Maybe I just need to work harder. Maybe somehow I've lost the stamina I used to have earlier in my career. But what if the heaviness that we're feeling right now isn't a reflection of our teaching at all? What if it's a reflection of the growing expectations and conditions surrounding our work? What if it's a reflection of everything that teachers are being asked to carry all at the same time right now? And that's the conversation I want to explore today. So here's what I think. When we step back and we really look at what teaching has become in many schools over the past several years, some important patterns begin to emerge. The work itself hasn't just grown, but the conditions surrounding the work have changed. Schedules are more crowded. Planning time is shrinking. Meetings are definitely multiplying. Documentation requirements are growing. Our students' needs are so much different than they were 10 years ago. The new curriculum is introduced before teachers have a chance to truly understand the prior one. And these expectations keep stacking higher and higher, while the space that we have to do the work well, that just keeps getting smaller. And yet, every morning, teachers still walk into their classrooms expected to bring clarity, creativity, patience, and emotional presence to their students. And I'll tell you, that is a lot to carry. Teaching didn't suddenly become heavier because we've changed. It became heavier because everything we're asked to carry has changed. So let me ask you something. When you think about the heaviness that you felt this year or that you're feeling right now, where does it show up most for you? Maybe it's in the planning time that disappears into meetings, or maybe it's you lying at bed at night thinking about that student who's struggling and wishing you could do more. Or maybe it's sitting at your desk after school, trying to plan tomorrow's lesson while answering emails and documenting your interventions and preparing for a parent teacher conference all at the same time. Most of the time, it isn't just one thing that feels heavy, it's the layers. And the tricky part is those layers don't always show up clearly while you're in the middle of the work. They just feel like this general sense of weight that follows you throughout the day. But when you step back and you start examining that weight from a 50,000-foot view, when you can look down onto it, you begin to see that there are three distinct types of load that teachers are carrying right now: the workload, the mental load, and the emotional load. And I'd like to take some time and explore those. So let's take a minute and unpack the workload. All right. So teaching has always involved long hours. We know that. Hard work, absolutely. And we expect that when we chose this profession. But what has changed over time is how many additional responsibilities are now surrounding the core work of teaching. More meetings, more documentation, like I said, more initiatives designed to improve instruction, more expectations around communication, collaboration, and additional duties. And don't even get me started about the number of different, programs that we need to be proficient in, from data dashboards to student information systems and so many more. And none of these things are inherently bad. Most of them come out of a genuine desire to support students and improve schools. But from a classroom perspective, those expectations rarely come one at a time. They arrive layered on top of the work that we are already doing. And eventually, the day begins to feel full before we've even started. And that's where the workload begins to impact our profession, not because teachers are not capable. It's not that we can't handle the work, but because the work is expanded in ways that pull us in so many multiple directions at once. And it often is pulling us in this direction that's away from the very thing that we're tasked to do, which is to teach. And as I begin to consider this change in conditions a little bit deeper, it made me realize that the system itself has changed over time due to a number of factors. I used to believe that the priority truly was on being child-centered, but I feel like it's moved into like this political layer, right? We're chasing test scores and letter grades. We're competing with charter schools for students. There isn't really a consistent set of expectations for our work because initiatives come and go so fast. The curriculum doesn't stick around long enough to see if it works. And we rarely have enough time to dig into that curriculum and get really good at it before a new one is either introduced or something else is added on. So that it's no wonder that with all of this, teachers are finding themselves moving from one responsibility to the next all day long, and often without that space to pause and focus deeply on the parts of teaching that matter the most. And so when I started thinking about workload, I had to start thinking about what is it that I can do to like lift some of this load off of me, right? I had to get really honest with myself. And I realized there are parts of the workload that I could not control. So I can't control the number of initiatives that are coming from the district. And I can't control the curriculum that we're adopting or how frequently that's happening. And I can't control the number of meetings that are on the calendar, really. But there was one piece of the workload that I could control, and that was how often I volunteered for extra duties. And once I started looking at my week through that lens, I realized something that was a little uncomfortable and a little scary for me to admit. And that was that I had done a lot of this to myself because I was raising my hand a lot. Over time, I had become the team lead for my grade level. I helped run student council. I served on the curriculum adoption committee. I helped create our pacing guides and our curriculum maps. I helped organize the school events. I supported professional development. I coached after school activities. I ran tutoring groups. I was in charge of our child study team. You know, it was a lot, but at the time, I didn't think of those things as burdens. I thought of them as just ways that I could contribute to the community. But once I noticed the pattern, that's when that uncomfortable realization hit that I had unintentionally built a workload that no person could sustain over time. And I had brought it all on myself. And just like the workload, it didn't all show up at once. It built over time. And I never really noticed the impact on my teaching until I hit that wall of overwhelm. See, for years, I thought that the heaviness that I felt meant that I simply needed to work harder or that I needed to manage my time better. Those things that most teachers are asking themselves, right? But eventually I realized that I needed to set boundaries because boundaries didn't mean that I cared less, but boundaries were what was going to make it possible for me to sustain the work over time. So if workload feels heavy right now, there's one small place that you might be able to begin asking yourself a simple question, right? Where am I raising my hand out of habit? And what would happen if I paused for a moment before volunteering? Not because the work doesn't matter, but because your sustainability, it really matters. Okay. So now the second layer of this weight is something that people outside of the classroom rarely see. This is the mental load. Okay, it's those external pressures that start stacking up. When that happens, something subtle begins to happen inside the classroom. And it's that teachers, we lose the time that we once had to think. And that loss of thinking time, it matters more than most people realize because great teaching doesn't begin when students walk through the door. It begins long before that, right? When teachers have the time to sit down with a lesson and really think it through, really identify what the intention of that lesson is. How does it link to other lessons? To ask questions like, where might students struggle with this idea? Or what questions can I pose that might help make sense of the content that we're working in? What experiences will actually engage my students in the learning? That kind of thinking is where teaching lives. And that is also where intentional teaching begins. But let me ask you something. When was the last time that you had uninterrupted time to actually think through a lesson like that? And I'm not talking nights and weekends. I'm talking about in your instructional or your contractual day. Because in my experience, teachers rarely have the time now in their contract day to effectively plan those meaningful lessons. But when the planning time disappears into meetings and required tasks, the thinking, it doesn't disappear. I mean, we still need to teach, right? So that thinking, it simply moves into the classroom. Here's what I mean by that. Instead of walking into a lesson with clarity, we end up making decision after decision in real time. We are adjusting, redirecting, re explaining, reworking that plan on the spot in the moment. And that constant decision making is exhausting. And there's actually a name for it. It's called decision fatigue. And decision fatigue happens when the brain becomes so overwhelmed by the sheer number of choices it has to process. And every little decision uses a little bit of cognitive energy. And when those decisions begin to stack across an entire school day, oh my gosh, the brain, it reaches a point where it struggles to process information. It can't do it anymore. And we experience this as teachers constantly. We monitor behavior, we adjust instruction, we're answering questions, managing transitions, supporting students emotionally. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of micro decisions every single day. And you know that moment when someone asks you a simple question after work. It might be like, what do you want for dinner? And suddenly you're just like, "Ugh, I don't care. I don't know. Like, I can't make one more decision. That's decision fatigue. And that moment doesn't mean that you're failing. It means that your brain has been working incredibly hard all day long. So, one way to lighten that mental load is not to carry all of that thinking alone. Take some time and plan with your team. When teachers sit down together to unpack standards, explore units, or talk through where students might struggle, and share ideas about how teaching that lesson, how they can do that effectively, something really powerful happens. The cognitive load, it becomes shared. And suddenly the work feels a little lighter. And let's be honest, collaboration often sounds like amazing in theory, but impossible in practice, right? Between meetings, prep, grading, and the unpredictable pace of the day, carving out time to co plan with a colleague can feel like an absolute stretch. But here's the truth: collaboration doesn't have to take hours. A focused 20-minute sprint can spark new ideas, strengthen clarity, reduce the planning overwhelm, and most importantly, multiply your impact. So I've included a resource in the show notes. It's called the 20-minute co-planning sprint. And hopefully you'll find that useful. It maps out exactly how to do this 20-minute sprint. It's not about doing more. It's not about adding one more thing to your plate. It's about planning smarter and protecting your energy. You're going to find the link in the show notes. Okay. All right. Now, the third layer of this weight is often one that we feel most deeply. It's that emotional load, because teaching is relational work. And when teachers notice a student who normally is attentive and they begin to disengage, or a student who's generally a team player but now is being bossy or aggressive, we want to know what's going on. We care so deeply about our students that those moments, they don't just stay in the classroom. They travel home with us. I remember in my own classroom, it kind of captures this beautifully. It was late in the afternoon one day. Students were working independently, and I had a student who was unusually quiet, like all day long. And normally, this student, he loved to participate in discussions, but that day he didn't talk a whole lot. And so during this independent time, I walked over and I asked him if everything was okay. And at first, he kind of shrugged his shoulders, and I dug a little bit deeper. And after a few seconds, he looked up and he quietly said, I'm sorry, my mom lost her job yesterday. And I'll tell you, like in that moment, nothing was important as, you know, that little human that was sitting in front of me. I mean, we talked for a few minutes and eventually he went back to work. But I remember driving home and thinking about him, and wondering what the next few weeks were going to be like for him and his family. I remember realizing something that teachers experience all the time but rarely say out loud, and that's when you care about your students, their lives don't stay neatly in the classroom walls. We as teachers, we absorb pieces of all those little stories, and over time those pieces accumulate and we are carrying those with us all day long. But here's the perspective that helped me kind of shift things once I understood it. And it's this concept called locus of control. And at its simplest level, it means recognizing what we can influence and what we cannot. Teachers cannot control everything that's happening in a student's life outside the classroom. We want to, but we can't. But what we can control is the environment that we create in our rooms while they are with us. We can create classrooms where students feel respected, where they feel safe, where they feel like their voices matter, where they are seen, and they know that there's an adult who believes in them. And sometimes that consistency, it matters more than we realize. So if teaching has been feeling heavy lately for you, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken. You are not failing. It's not that you're not organized. You are responding to a profession that is asking a lot of you. And the reality is that teaching has slowly become heavier. Yes. But that doesn't mean that we need to hang out in all of that heaviness. We can choose one or two strategies that might help lighten our load. Maybe you're going to decide that it's time for you to dive into a co-planning period. Or maybe it's setting clear boundaries so that you're not giving away your time so much. Or maybe it's just acknowledging that it exists and giving yourself some grace in this season. Because sometimes when teaching feels heavy, it helps to remember that even on those days when you feel like you're just trying to keep everything moving forward, you are still making a difference in ways that you will never fully see. So if something in today's conversation resonated with you, and as we were having this conversation, you thought of another teacher who might need to hear this right now, I hope you'll consider sharing this episode with them. Because sometimes the most powerful thing that we can do for each other in this profession is to remind one another that we're not carrying the weight alone. And if you like this episode, please be sure to like the button, so that you keep getting notified about new ones as they come up. And if no one's told you today, what you do matters and you matter. I'll see you next time on the Community Effect Podcast. Have a great day.